Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Empowering Teachers, a classroom-centric approach to iPad management. My name is Nikki Lewandowski, and I'm currently the Systems Administrator at Canisius High School. Back in 2011, I joined the team there to help bring about their first one-to-one iPad deployment. And my career has kind of developed alongside their deeper integration of technology into the daily classroom lives of our students. I grew up as the daughter of a math teacher who turned into a technology integration specialist. So from a young age, I had a passion for helping teachers learn how to use technology in the classroom. If you end up with any questions or you forget to say something here and you'd like to have a conversation with me after, you can find me at Lewandowski on Slack. So Canisius High School is an all-boys Catholic Jesuit college preparatory school in beautiful, sunny Buffalo, New York. The school's student body is actually comprised of an array of ethnicities, religions, financial backgrounds. We're actually really proud of that. That diversity offers us a good way to provide a learning environment that they might not get in a traditional, more local high school. But the administration realized back in 2006 that that was actually creating a disparity in learning opportunity for some of our students. Back then, laptops were becoming cheaper, and some of our families could afford to give them to their students to bring in, and others couldn't. With ready access to a piece of technology, some students began to be able to access information quicker and complete their coursework more easily. Thankfully, our administration was not reactionary, and they understood that a thoughtful implementation was the most important part of getting devices into the classroom. We needed the right device on our network that could support added traffic. Most of all, we needed to make sure that the teachers were actually comfortable having those devices in their room. After all, what good is a device if a teacher's not actually going to use it? The entire design of our program was focused around the classroom experience from the start. So that's not to say we didn't have our assembling blocks along the way. It's been a learning curve. Today, we're going to discuss an overview of our implementation philosophy and how our program began. We'll talk about what didn't go so well and what tools and apps we've come to rely on to create a positive classroom experience. We'll conclude by giving an update on what we're still tweaking with our program and where we're going to go from here. So, from before we decided upon a device, we knew that we needed to create a culture of communication and collaboration. We had a pilot program that included Linux, Android, and Windows-based devices, and the teachers used them in a shared environment. We solicited a feedback, asked what they liked, what they didn't like, what they were missing, what they really felt they needed. So their voices felt like they were heard. In March 2011, Apple released the iPad 2. It had a 10-hour battery life, which meant students could actually use the device all day in the classroom. Our school is located in a very old building that would be very expensive to retrofit power to, so this was really the kind of factor that pushed us to be able to make a one-to-one program available. On top of that, AirPlay's ability to let teachers cut the cord and have a more fluid classroom experience was super exciting. And iOS management capabilities meant we, as the technology department, could normalize the student experience. The iPad checked all of our boxes. Awesome. Now to get people to use it in the classroom, the easy part, right? When given new technology, individuals tend to fall into one of three categories. Your early adopters already know exactly how they're going to use the iPad with their students. They're already begging you to start the program tomorrow. On the other side of the coin, there's individuals that will actively resist any change in the classroom and want to continue teaching the way they always have. Why fix it if it isn't broken, right? Most teachers can see how an iPad would be a useful tool, but they worry whether or not it could truly be used effectively in the classroom. They're what we're going to call your hesitant prove-its. And there's a surprising amount of resistors in this world. A growing amount of psychological research indicates that technophobia can not only decrease work satisfaction, but actually lead to the development of anxiety and the manifestation of anxiety-related physical disorders. It's a challenge, and it may be really frustrating to try to coax the resistors into a brave new technology-enhanced classroom, but it's essential to both those teachers and the success of your program that they get a little extra care and consideration. When I first arrived at Canisius, we had our fair share of resistors. We had a few teachers who still relied on overhead projectors and VHS tapes, despite access to Windows-based laptops. The biggest concern our faculty expressed was that students would know more than they did, and they wouldn't feel very confident in front of their classroom, that they would lose control of the class. We realized that the program needed to be championed by a teacher who had a specific vision for implementing technology in the classroom. It needed to be someone who had an affinity for technology and a strong foundation in curriculum development. To do this, we formed a new position, the Director of Academic Technology. Faculty received their first iPads in December of 2011. We gave it to them a full semester before we gave students iPads. The technology department worked in conjunction with our Director of Academic Technology to produce our own curriculum for teachers to try to win over some of those hesitant prove-its. We began a series of lunch and learns geared towards showing the educational benefits of the iPad. And in recognition of the very restrictive schedule that some teachers are on, particularly when they have families to go home to, we purchased an online subscription for lynda.com so they could do some self-paced professional development. And finally, to accommodate our early adopters, we made a classroom set of iPads available for projects. We saw collaboration with departments as a key to adoption and wanted to encourage teachers who were willing to lead. The classrooms themselves changed a little bit. We installed Apple TVs in every classroom, which was essential for classroom management. Teachers could walk around and see what was on their screens of all their students. Remember, Apple Classroom wasn't a thing then. And we named each Apple TV after the room they were in, so it was easily identifiable. Each Apple TV was password protected, and we delivered that password to teachers in a configuration profile that they could download from self-service. Teachers often cover for one another in our building. We don't have it like a designated substitute or anything like that. So it was essential that they could get what they needed when they needed it, and that's why we chose to deliver it in that mechanism. Smartboards were no longer necessary, and teachers actually begged us to remove them. A 21st century classroom not only has to have reliable devices, but it needs students who are capable and confident in using them. If a teacher has to spend twice the amount of time teaching you how to use the device, then you're not really actually positively affecting that classroom with technology. So, as a whole, the younger generation has a certain affinity for technology, but just because they grew up with more technology doesn't always mean that they know how to use it consistently on a day-to-day work-type basis. Being required to use a device was a big change, and some of our students never had the opportunity to grow up with technology. Using iBooks Author, we created an interactive iBook covering the very basics and some simple troubleshooting. We included guides on using each of our required applications, and teachers were provided with this book so they understood what the base understanding level of their students was, and they could anticipate it. We also created a help desk so that if a student was having a technical issue, the teacher could send him to a member of the tech department to troubleshoot it instead of derailing class time to do so themselves. I should also note that we made a conscious decision not to restrict student iPads. We had a lot of conversations about the decision, and part of the thought was that if students had an emotional attachment to their iPad, if they had their photos and their music on there, that they would keep track of it better. They would be less likely to break it, lose it. We were using Jamf to manage our devices, and we were also heavily influenced by a talk that they were giving at one of their regional user conferences back then. And they suggested that when you're administering Apple products, that you should manage with a carrot and not a stick. And in 2012, we had far less sticks to use. There weren't as many configuration profile restrictions. So besides the financial implications of buying a ton of apps that you ultimately end up not using, we wanted to make sure that the apps that were used in the classroom were actually going to be used, not just downloaded once and discarded. As part of his dissertation, Harry Walker from Johns Hopkins University researched how to best establish content validity of an evaluation rubric for mobile technology applications. Based on his research, we created a process for app evaluation to ensure apps purchased supported curriculum and enhanced student learning. iBooks Author was released about a month after our teachers received their iPads, and some of the teachers were super excited, but back then they all had Windows laptops. So thankfully, we were about a year away from having them replaced, and iBooks Author actually just dictated our next purchasing decision. Since then, every teacher received MacBooks, and at this time we have 0 Windows endpoints in our school. We introduced an app called eBackpack. At the time, it was just a file distribution and assignment submission app. Teachers began using it to distribute content and collect assignments. Within the first year of students having iPads, we saw a 15.5% reduction in printing, but it was not an ideal situation to keep something that students just download their worksheets on and then keep a separate learning management system elsewhere. So we started evaluating other learning management systems. Around the same time, Jamf came out with Casper Focus. Casper Focus was the precursor to Apple Classroom. Development on it was abandoned, obviously, when Apple came out with Apple Classroom. But because Casper Focus came out, it accelerated that change in our LMS. Our teachers wanted to be able to give quizzes on the iPad. So during spring of 2013, we identified 10 teachers who would pilot the Schoology program. They said that they'd give up all the other tools that we'd given them previously to use and evaluate it. The goal of the pilot was to determine if full school adoption was actually even viable. We demoed this at the back-to-school returning faculty meeting. By the end of the meeting, we had 35 teachers standing in front of us, begging us to give them this technology, much more than we're ever excited about having an iPad in their classroom. Schoology is kind of like Facebook, optimized for a school if you've never seen it before. So the fact that it was easy to use and had a low learning curve meant that people were excited about what they could do with it. Based on the adoption rate and feedback from teachers, our administration moved the transition date up to January 2014. But our Schoology pilot proved the effectiveness of having teachers learn from someone who speaks from their point of view. One of the defenses that resistors tend to use is that the technology seems cool, but it doesn't really apply to their subject area, or they can't really see how they could use it. So we established a tech leader position and did our best to obtain a tech leader from each subject area. The position had a small stipend to offset the extra work, and our tech leaders were required to run at least one professional development conference or seminar for their colleagues a year. And they were the ones that we had pilot any changes that we were planning, and we solicited feedback from them. If you're not able to create a position like this, maybe you're in a larger school district, I'd encourage you to look into Apple's One Best Thing series, written by Apple distinguished educators. These iBooks are wonderful resources for teachers to get ideas on how to enrich their lessons with technology. Just having a device in the classroom is not enough. The SAMR model was developed by education researchers to convey how meaningfully a piece of technology is used in the classroom. So we move from a direct substitution all the way up to a transformative redefinition. A substitution is when technology has no functional change. You're just doing the same thing, but you're doing it on the piece of technology. Taking notes on an iPad instead of on a piece of paper, for example. In augmentation, it's still a direct substitute, but there's a functional improvement. So instead of reading that paper book like we always did, you give them the textbook on the iPad where they can click and define the word in iBooks. In modification, technology allows for a significant task redesign. So technology enabling collaboration through Google Docs, for example. In redefinition, technology allows for creation of new tasks that were previously inconceivable. And what is redefinition kind of varies based on each of the classroom and each of the teachers and what they can imagine. But that's kind of where we want all of our classes to end up. That's the goal. To ease the anxiety of pushing for that redefinition, though, we created 2 teacher goals and just asked them to address that. Do one thing you've always done, but this time do it with an iPad. And then create a lesson that you were previously not able to do with your students, but this time have a student use an iPad with it. So instead of doing a book report, for example, one of our teachers took that and asked them to reimagine, I think it was Brave New World, reimagine it and create like a 3 to 5 minute movie trailer for the book. If you're interested in this and you'd like some more resources, they're linked on screen. After the first year, we did an evaluation. First thing we realized, which I'm sure all of you guessed, was maybe we do need some restrictions. And the surprising thing was that students knowing more than teachers was actually okay. It created that same kind of collaboration and facilitation that we had with teachers, but with the teachers and students, so it kind of more enriched the classroom. We also found that parents needed education and support too. So we spent a lot of time developing resources for teachers and students, and we sort of forgot about the parents. We didn't produce much, if any, parent-focused content, and so when students left our environment, they didn't have that same level of support at home. And some parents, much like teachers, were kind of worried about what the technology would do, and some parents just took the iPad from their students at home. When we discussed implementing restrictions, we wanted to do so in a meaningful way. One of the mottos of our school is that we prepare students for college and for life. We're not adequately preparing them for college if all we do is restrict their iPad for 4 years. But we recognize that freshmen need a little bit more help managing distractions during class time. So we started with disabling iMessage and FaceTime to prevent a flurry of alerts during classes. We prevented modifying the device name and set restrict app usage to only allow some. We coupled this with digital citizenship programs throughout the year. In order to whitelist some apps, we created a restrictions profile. Under iOS and tvOS tab, we selected applications and only allow some apps. This payload does not prevent an app from being downloaded on the device. If a student downloads Fortnite or whatever, you're still going to see that on your inventory reports in your MDM. But it prevents the app from being shown on the student iPad and thus from being able to be launched and interacted with. If you do choose to go this route, I can tell you we have probably 200 or 300 applications whitelisted in there and it works just fine. But you do need to make sure that you're conscious of whitelisting system apps like mail and settings. Your MDM, so self-service, needed to be whitelisted. Similarly, there's a highlighted bundle ID on screen, the com.apple.core.cdpui.local secret prompt. That's actually essential for iCloud and Google to sign in. So if you don't whitelist that, your students just don't ever get to sign into iCloud. Similarly, if you plan to use web apps, you have to whitelist com.apple.webapp. You'll notice that I named this profile V17. If I'm going to deploy configuration profiles and make a change and then redeploy them, I actually version my profiles just as a kind of quick check. So yeah, I could go to the management tab and I could see whether or not it's received the profile on that, but it only keeps so many management commands in the history. This way I can go to the profiles tab and I can just quickly see, oh, this student doesn't have access to Notability. I pushed that in version 17 of the profile. He still has version 16. Let's see what we can do to fix that now. We decided to tier our restrictions. So sophomores have pretty much the same restrictions profile, but they can request that apps be added to the whitelist themselves. The freshman whitelist is only for teachers. Juniors and seniors have no app restrictions. Just because we can restrict something doesn't mean we should. Let's take AirDrop for an example. You'll notice earlier that I said we restricted changing device names. You might have thought that it's for some interesting emojis or names that ended up there. It actually wasn't. So back to school gets pretty hectic, and freshmen often like to test their boundaries technologically. One September, students began receiving these airdropped to them. Looks like every detention slip you've ever received in school, right? Even more entertainingly, no one knew who Miss Jessie was. There was no one in the school who worked anything like that name. But a student helpfully reported to the dean's office before his next class and prevented this, so that it came from the help desk. Well, as we know, device name is shown when the content is airdropped. So a quick search in our Jamf Pro showed exactly which iPad and student whom it belonged. We had some questions after the incident. Why didn't we just ban airdrop? And that was, of course, the first inkling of the technology department as a whole. Like, you have a problem, ban it, right? We talked to our academic technology director, and we actually found that it was legitimately being used in the classroom by teachers. There weren't as many collaboration tools back then, like Schoolwork wasn't a thing, for example. So they were legitimately using it for group work. And if we would have just banned it, we would have interfered with that classroom experience. Instead, we just went this route. When we were doing it, we wanted to make sure that when you received airdropped content, you could remember the name of the device and we could still track it. I wanted it to be the student's full name. That's pretty easy to remember. So the default names in your pre-stage enrollments are only the default name of the device that Apple wants to pick, a list of names or serial numbers, not full names. In order to get the device name set to what I wanted, we used the MUT. The Mass Update tool is available on the Mac App Store and can update several computer, mobile device, or user fields from a CSV. In order to update the device names of mobile device records, I needed a CSV where the first column is the serial number and the second column is the user's full name, which is what I wanted to set the device name to. In order to generate this file, I'd first go to Settings and then over to the Device Management tab, and take a look at Inventory Display. On the User and Location tab, I have full name available. So I'll click Edit, go over there, select full name, and I'm going to grab the username just to be safe. Save this. So this is actually set on a per user basis within Jamf Pro. And now when I go to my smart device groups and I view my all students group, I'm going to see those two fields as a part of the names there. And I can just click export and export as a CSV. And now I have the file that I need to import into the MUT. One thing that we do explicitly ban is VPNs. If I were to create a restrictions profile to hide VPNs on user devices, I'd have to know the name and bundle ID of every VPN app out there. That's a little too cumbersome for me. So instead, we employed a different management tactic. We had a smart device group that looked at app name, profile name, and provisioning profile name. We searched for the most common VPNs by name, stuff that doesn't include the word VPN in it, like Betternet, as well as any app or profile with VPN in the title. For apps that fell into this smart device group, we wanted to employ restrictions that students would notice, but not hinder their academic usage of the device. To determine what non-educational apps students enjoyed the most, we just searched Jamf Pro. So for our case, what we do is we just go up to switch mobile devices to mobile device apps. And we can use the wildcard character of an asterisk and go over and click search. This can take a while, and there's a caveat that I'll explain in 1 second. But when you go down to matches and you click it, it will actually reorder and show you the most popular apps, what's installed on how many devices. We can scroll through here, see what they've downloaded from self-service, from the App Store, and find, oh, there's Game Pigeon there. Wonder what that is. Clearly it's not educational. I can see a list of all of the students that have it installed there and interact with their iPads from there. In large-scale deployments, searching in this manner can have adverse effects on your Jamf Pro server. We still have like 1,200 iOS devices in here at most right now, and we can handle searching in this manner and still be okay. If you have a larger deployment, you can query the API. There's a script that you can adapt on Jamf Nation. This was just easier for our help desk. Once we found the non-education apps that our students enjoyed the most, we consulted our web filter to determine the non-academic sites our students enjoyed frequenting the most. We created a highly restricted profile designed to allow students to continue using apps required for their coursework, but specifically block everything that they enjoyed for entertainment. So in all boys school, we content filter blocked sites like ESPN and all major sports sites. We removed their access to their camera, made their lives a little bit more difficult by turning off Touch ID and Face ID for unlocking their iPads, and turned off the dictionary, spell check, and autocorrect. We scoped it to the smart group that looked for VPN softwares, and students would usually email us or stop down to the help desk very quickly and let us know that their iPad was malfunctioning in new and interesting ways. It worked so well we began using the profile for behaviors we wanted to discourage in general. So we were concerned with students sideloading apps like the Game Boy for iOS emulator or vShare. We applied it to that as well. Occasionally, we'd come across a student that these inconveniences were not inconvenient enough to warrant them resolving the issue. We needed a way to alert teachers that a student in their class needed to speak to us. So we created a smart user group that looked for devices with the See Help Desk Now profile installed. And then we used the automated management tab of that mobile device group to set the lock screen and home screen to a wallpaper that was a beautiful, bright shade of pink, easily identifiable for students and teachers alike. This worked really well. We used a similar method to help address the concern of lost and stolen iPads. Early on in our program, we had an iPad that was left on a school bus, and it got returned to us because that student happened to choose a Canisius image as his wallpaper. Someone saw it, called the school, and said, "Hey, does this belong to you?" After this experience, we began mandating their wallpaper settings. But what if the iPad is actually legitimately taken? Of course, activation lock prevents reuse if we don't know the password and bypass code. But what if it's the student who's leaving on not great terms? Can we do anything to recover the iPad then? The first time this happened to us, I had recently watched the DEF CON talk pwned by the owner, What Happens When You Steal a Hacker's Computer. It's actually really funny. You should look it up on YouTube. It's wonderful. The speaker was able to recover his computer because he was able to remotely control the device. Had the device been erased or bricked in any other way, he would have never gotten it back. So with this fresh in my mind, we actually allowed the student to re-enroll the device and just set every restriction possible. It hid every app except Mail and Safari, set the content filter to only be able to access major email providers, and the device was still obtaining an IP and could be reported on or given to the police for investigation if we needed to. But the device lost all of its value to the student. Ultimately, we've actually gotten all of our devices back that this has happened to. The vast majority of iPads reported as lost are actually just misplaced in the building. We leveraged the lock screen message configuration profile to assist teachers in determining which iPads left in the room belong to which students. So we can actually use the $username and $device name wildcards to put that information on there. Of course, we could make the iPad play a sound, but if a teacher just finds a random iPad in their room, they didn't have a way to just look up the serial number or anything like this. So it was a little bit easier for them to get it back to the students quicker. Sometimes, though, we don't want automatic management. Take the case of Tinder, for example. Though Tinder's terms of service require you to be 18 years old, for a while the app was really popular amongst high school students. Our administration didn't want to specifically start enforcing any other restrictions in this case, but they wanted the ability to counsel students, to be able to say, hey, what's going on here? So what we did was we created a smart device group looking for devices with the Tinder app installed. And of course, there's a send email notification on membership change here. But again, this is on a per Jamf Pro user basis. So in order to be able to set this setting, you have to have edit access to the mobile device group. And I didn't want to give that to my dean of students. I just created a local user in the Jamf Pro for him with a profile or with a password that he never knew, logged in, set the setting for him, configured his email address, and now he began receiving emails every time a student installed the app or removed the app from his device. I suspect most IT departments in education had at least a minor headache with the release of Fortnite. We didn't want to ban the social experience. Like, we understood that this was pretty important for the guys to kind of play after school and hang out. But it was affecting classes. So we actually just banned Fortnite within our web content filter and left it available on their iPads. That way they can continue playing the game with their friends at home. At Canisius, students created their own Apple IDs. For a while, our administration determined that it would be best if students created their own email addresses as well. Don't do that. That was a disaster. It's mostly a disaster because students forget their passwords over the summer, particularly when they're not logging into their email every day. For stuff like a free app or a VPP managed code, you can pull that back and give that to their new Apple ID when they inevitably also forget their Apple ID password that's linked to that email. But with books, particularly books that they're using for multiple years, that can be a very costly mistake. So we began requiring students to use their @canisiushighschool.org email addresses as their Apple IDs. At least then we had control over the email address and could reset their password. We also have loaner iPads available for students with broken or lost iPads. So in order to ensure the best user experience for them, we had elected to assign VPP content to users instead of device-based assignments. To support this setup, we've integrated Apple School Manager with our student information system, PowerSchool. Apple has a setup assistant to guide you through the process. Apple School Manager currently supports direct integration with PowerSchool, SunGuard, eSchool Plus, and Infinite Campus. A host of A host of other SISs are supported through SFTP upload, and a complete list can be found at the linked Apple support article on screen. Managed Apple IDs can be created with a combination of any of the prefixes displayed on the right graphic. We selected their email username, as this is the username that our faculty and students use for all other services. To integrate Apple School Manager with Jamf Pro, we go to the Global Management settings and then to Apple Education Support. Here you can check Enable Apple Education Support and then go to the Apple School Manager Instances tab. Here you can add a new instance or view the settings for a current instance. These are the settings for my current instance. I have Apple School Manager syncing with Jamf Pro at 2:15 every morning. This leaves a couple of hours between the sync with Apple School Manager and my SIS to run completely before I then sync my SIS my Apple School Manager with Jamf Pro. For my class naming format, I was conscious of how it would appear to students in classes and teachers in classroom. So for that, we used the course name dash section and then the class number. So instead of seeing biology 1, they'd see biology dash section 1. The most important part of the setup is matching the Apple IDs to users in your Jamf Pro. The users assigned to my mobile devices are actually LDAP users. So for this situation, we matched managed Apple IDs to Jamf Pro usernames. Classes are not automatically made available in Apple School Manager once the Apple School Manager integration is complete. So in order to make them available, we'll go to Classes, and we'll go up to Import. From here, we can choose the site that our classes belong to. I don't actually have a need to include a site, so I'm just going to go ahead and click Next. I can select individual classes to import. Or if I want to import all classes, I can select the checkbox next to class name. But for this case, I'm actually just going to select a couple classes. Go ahead and click Next. And we're going to see information about this, the class ID, the course name, the course number. We can check the users. I generally always recommend checking the user tabs because it's going to match them to your Jamf Pro users. Click Next, and we're done. Once the import is completed, enrollment in classes is automatically updated and synced with your student information system, or with with Apple School Manager every night. We can assign apps directly to classes, and this is all we need for free apps. But what about paid apps that require VPP assignment to be configured? I'll need a group of users that I can assign the content to for that. Smart user groups have very limited fields that can be searched upon. And as of the current Jamf Pro release, you cannot assign content to users who are in a class directly. So one evening on Slack, a couple of us were discussing the issue, and like what occurs sometimes on Slack, I woke up the next morning to a solution. Richard Purvis wrote a script that adds a Jamf Pro user to a user group based on a CSV. If the user group does not exist, the script creates it for you. The script is available on Richard's GitHub, linked on screen. Though these groups are not dynamically updated based on SIS enrollment, it eliminates most of the needs, or most of the headaches for our help desk. For our school, it's very common for students to transfer sections throughout the year to get a different teacher, but it's very uncommon after the first week or so for them to transfer courses. One tip that comes from experience: if you ever use user-based assignment, be sure to create one static user group as an exclusionary group. Then add this to the exclusion scope of all of your user content. For troubleshooting purposes or licensing purposes, you may eventually need to delete a user. Users can't be deleted from Jamf Pro if they have any content currently assigned to them. The sync between my SIS and Apple School Manager manages the rollover of classes in Apple School Manager, but I still need to delete those classes from Jamf Pro. I don't fancy deleting 500 classes by hand every year, so I actually use the SIS importer that Jamf initially created before Apple School Manager's existence. Once the SIS importer is downloaded from Jamf Nation, there's a bunch of sample files in here. I'm actually only going to need one class to be created, and I could open this in Numbers or in Excel and edit it, but I just need my username there and that's it. And then I can just save the file. Once that's saved, I can open the JSS conduit, unzip it, there we go, expand the folder and expand the resources folder. For this to work, I need to take this jar file and put it into the plugins folder, and then I can launch the JSS conduit. Go ahead and click the plus and select the plugin, the SIS importer, and now I'm going to browse for that file. Note that when we tell this that we want to delete all classes, it's actually going to delete every class. It doesn't matter if it's been imported from Apple School Manager or manually created. And it will give us a warning as such right there. We'll insert the Jamf Pro URL and username. If you were running this on a consistent basis, I would recommend you create a service account for this. I'm just going to use my own real quick because I don't actually keep this on my computer. I check enabled, and then export now. If I were to have run this, it would have deleted all my classes. I still have summer school, so we're not going to do that right now. But What would be left in this case is a single class named that math class from the sample file with me as the teacher, and that's it. Then I can just log in and delete that class, and I'm ready to import next year's classes. Our Apple Classroom setup leverages the classes created by the sync between Apple School Manager and our SIS to pre-populate teachers' classes with the students they teach. Though unmanaged classes can be set up by the teachers, SIS integration saves teachers time and frustration. Let's see what that looks like for teachers. When we launch Apple Classroom, we can see a full list of all students. Note that though additional students are enrolled in my class, they'll be listed as offline until the devices are on and within Bluetooth range of my device. There are separate groups of students across the top listed by which app they currently have open. And if I want to see which students have which app open, I can just go ahead and click on them. Philip appears to be using Safari. I wonder if he's looking at anything educational. So I'll tap on his iPad and then view the screen. Yeah, that's probably not educational. But as he's going to another site, I can see it, obviously with a small delay. And as we scroll through that site, I can see exactly what he's viewing. Clearly, my students must be done with their previous tasks. So let's switch gears and have them review some of their notes. We'll go down to Notability and focus them into Notability. Cool. We'll click Done. And we'll go back and take a look at Philip's iPad by clicking on View Screen again. And he's right back on ESPN. So we didn't select the lock-in app after opening. And since all the other students seem to be focused pretty well on their work, we're only going to lock Philip. So we'll go back, click Apps, and we're going to find maybe iBooks to make sure that he's reading something educational. So I make sure to enable that lock-in app after opening session, and then he'll be prevented from leaving that app. Okay, click Done again. So if I click Navigate, I'm presented with this screen, and I'm going to choose to lock them into a particular website, the iPad user guide, for example. We'll check and see what that does for our easily distracted student, and we'll see that he's right back on the ESPN website. So though you can link somebody and focus them into a particular part of an app, ultimately, even if you lock them in there, they can go to any part of that app, and that's something that teachers should be aware of. If I want to show student work, I can select a student's iPad and then select AirPlay, the AirPlay location. And if there is a passcode required, like this requires an on-screen prompt, it will ask me to put it in for the student. And then the content would be displayed on the projector. So I'm going to actually unlock all of my student iPads, and then I'm going to end my class by clicking the End Class button in the upper left. I'm actually presented with a report that details all of the apps that were used during my class, how many students used the apps, and how many apps each student used. I can tap on a particular student to get a little bit more information about what they were doing during my class, exactly which apps they used and how long they used them for. One thing of note, when we deployed Apple Classroom, we required teachers attend a professional development class specifically on use of Apple Classroom. Not because it's particularly difficult, but because we wanted to make sure that Classroom was used as a tool and didn't counteract the advantages of having a device in the classroom. We made it explicitly clear that if a teacher didn't want students to be using an iPad at a particular time, that was completely okay. It's their classroom and their decision. But rather than lock them into an app that essentially rendered the iPad useless, we once had a teacher ask us for an app that would just display a picture of a flower. Why not ask them to put the iPad in their book bag? One of the most popular Apple Classroom use cases is locking students into Schoology to take tests. Though students can go anywhere within the app, Schoology automatically locks students out of the assessment if they're taking it, and they navigate away from that assessment. Schoology has a large number of question types. Here you see a matching question with a word bank that was used in one of our computer science classes this year. The linked Schoology support article gives an idea of other question types you can use. Here, a student is asked to complete the circuit with different highlighter colors. Note that their additional question types can still be auto-graded so students receive instant feedback. Teachers also receive that instant feedback. Though I've removed the names for student privacy, you'll see the results of an assessment given in one of our classes this year. We can not only see the score and time the assignment was submitted, but how long each student took on the assignment. And teachers can actually even look at that assessment more granularly. They can sort by the test question and the average score on that test question. Being able to pinpoint what topics may not have been understood as well allows teachers to better focus class time before building on those topics in the next lecture. Teachers are aware that Schoology's app does not use automatic assessment configuration. Automatic assessment configuration is an Apple entitlement that turns off autocorrect, spell check, predictive text, smart punctuation, dictionary definition lookup, keyboard shortcuts, the clipboard, screen recording and dictation to provide a truly secure testing environment. If your LMS is like Schoology and also does not use automatic assessment configuration, you're welcome to look into a browser-based solution like Respondus Lockdown Browser, which includes those features itself. We evaluated it, but ultimately our teachers chose question types such that they're either not concerned about the features being enabled, or they structure these assessments as more of a self-check type thing and to confirm understanding than an actual need for a secure environment. Schoolwork allows a teacher to share handouts, collect work, and directly link to an activity in a particular app. Schoolwork leverages the same setup in your MDM as Apple Classroom. Please note that though class is manually created in your MDM, will show up in Apple Classroom. You must have the class in Apple School Manager in order to use Schoolwork. You'll note the asterisks over there. During What's New in the Apple School Manager talk yesterday, Apple mentioned that in the fall, teachers will be able to create classes manually in Schoolwork and have these written back to Apple School Manager. In order to view student progress must be enabled on the Accounts page of Apple School Manager. Since Schoolwork saves documents in iCloud Drive, students and teachers must both be logged into iCloud with their managed Apple IDs. Let's take a look at Schoolwork from the teacher's perspective. Okay. When we launch the application, we'll see a list of all of our available classes. I'll be working on my test class today, so I can click plus in the upper right-hand corner to create a new assignment. Let's call this one Summer Homework. After I name my assignment, I can add different activities or request an item. The first thing we'll do is add a file. The file will bring up an iCloud Drive browser, and here I can select my CHSRUP. Perhaps I'd like them to read and return it for the fall. Then I'll tap Request Item so that they have a place to return it. And I'll give it a descriptive name so that students know what they're supposed to be giving me when I request this item from them. I can also ask them to view website links. So in this case, I'm going to ask them to take a peek at the Canisius High School Academics website. Make sure that they know a little bit more about the classes they'll be taking this fall. And then I can actually link to a portion within an app itself. So perhaps I'd like them to refresh their knowledge of technology terms using Quizlets. Here I see that there's no tech terms Quizlet deck for me to use. So I'm going to go and launch Quizlet right now and go to the search function to look for a tech terms deck. If you're not familiar with Quizlet, students and teachers can share, create, and collaboratively create flashcard decks. So this one looks okay to me. It covers the basics. We'll go back to this is absolutely the wrong video. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so we'll go back to Schoolwork now, and we can go ahead and add that technology terms. So, yeah, that's the wrong video. All right, I was going to show you guys what it looks like from a student perspective, so we're just going to go with a live demo now, because that's always a good idea. I was editing this slide deck earlier, and I apparently should not have. Sorry about that. All right. So when students launch Schoolwork, they're actually going to see all of their classes that are available in Apple School Manager for them, regardless of whether or not a teacher has ever launched Schoolwork. When we go into our test class, we'll see that summer homework assignment. And I've actually already submitted this for the recorded demo, which the slides I'm sure have. And if I don't, I'll make sure that the posted copy has them. But I can click Replace Item, go to Files. Oh, that's great. I can. Sorry about that. All right, let's try that again. All right, we can go to Replace Item and Files. Thank you. And we'll be able to select a file from within our iCloud Drive. Of course, it shows us the most recent ones. And of course, I'm offline. Oh, man. This is a lesson to you guys. If you present, don't keep tweaking with everything once you're content, because eventually you're just going to hit a point where it's diminishing returns. And something like this will happen to you. Yeah. All right. So if I want to take a look at what that website was, that might, seriously. Also why we don't do live demos, right? So it would take me directly to that website. Ta-da! All right. And then I can view whatever resource it was. Similarly, when I click on the application, which is totally updating right now because the demo gods hate me. You really can't make this up. All right, so when I actually update that, what's going to be nice about it, oh my God. iTunes, we did not want you to sync my iPad right now. All right. When we go ahead and click that, it'll tell us whether or not it's done. We can go ahead and launch Quizlet. And this is why I put it into a video, because Quizlet unfortunately takes a minute to launch, but it'll take us straight to that slide or that flashcard deck that we picked out earlier. The cool thing about Quizlet is you can also do it as a little matching game, so it keeps it kind of entertaining for students. One thing that I will note is that when the teacher views the schoolwork assignment, they're actually going to see the progress that students have made. And so I'm going to see that none of my students have actually completed it, but some of my students have actually made significant progress on this assignment. When I click on that signed RUP, I can, because it didn't actually upload, so even within here, so I can go to the CHS RUP and to this copy of the CHS RUP. Perhaps the student didn't know where to sign it and contacts me and says, I'm lost. And you thought that it was obvious, but it's clearly not to the student. You can actually go in here and use markup. And I had done this a little earlier, where this student now has an X on the spots where he needed to sign. If we go into a different student's assignment, of course not. All right, if we'd gone into a different student's assignment, if the demo gods didn't hate me, we'd see that that did not exist on the original assignment that I had uploaded. And now we're going to go back to the slide deck. All right. There's a handful of apps that are compatible with Schoolwork currently. Two of those apps that our teachers and students love actually have driven us to pilot Schoolwork last semester, and we're deploying it to the full school this year. Quizlet lets teachers share flashcards and decks with students. It also supports students collaboratively creating those flash decks. And Kahoot gamifies the classroom or your homework, making quizzes to confirm understanding actually fun. And more information about Schoolwork can be found in the Apple resource links below. Sometimes the role of an IT department is to help match a classroom need to the right software. In conjunction with our Director of Academic Technology, we're always on the lookout for apps that can enhance the classroom experience. He will evaluate and decide whether or not to demo them for teachers. One example would be the use of EduCreation's interactive whiteboard app, which helps teachers record lessons in support of a flipped classroom. Let's take a brief look at an example of one of these from my colleague Kathleen Pitek, an art teacher in our building.
Elements of this picture, either on one of the grid lines or at the intersection of a couple of grid lines. For instance, right here, you see the major wave in this section of the picture with one of the boats. Over here in this intersection, on this line, we see the image of Mount Fuji, which is a secondary focal point, and the second boat. The horizon line of the water is right across here on the bottom third. Very often in landscape work, the artist will put the horizon line on the bottom third line or the top third line.
So by creating her actual lecture time in EduCreations and assigning it as homework, she's now freed up her class time to help the students focus on their actual technique. And she can kind of do more of a workshop. In order to better prepare freshman students for day one of classes, we've created a course in our LMS that they are required to complete just as students are required to complete summer reading. It covers an overview of technology and apps that we use at Canisius. Though I'm unable to show the course today as it hasn't been approved by our administration, its structure is based off of a professional development course that my colleague Eric Amadeo created for our teachers. Each topic area has a lesson, as well as either a quiz or an assignment submission to demonstrate understanding. This program will launch August 1st. In the Ignatian spirit of reflection, each June we evaluate our technology in the classroom and our iPad model. We do our best to complete this evaluation in context to the SAMR model. How many classes that use technology do so meaningfully? What do we need to get more classes done and closer to redefinition? A lot of this evolution lies in continued professional development and teacher coaching. As a result of student interest, we've continued to revamp our technology-related course offerings. As of this year, we now have a computer science department with 4 full years worth of course offerings. By accepting iPads in the classroom in an intentional, meaningful way, it opened the door for a plethora of other technology. We now have 3D printers, Lego Mindstorm robots, drones, and in earth science, our students even use an augmented reality sandbox to model topography. Because we use media in the classroom, we're slowly renovating for an even better classroom experience. Half our classrooms are challenged with bright morning light that makes even the brightest of projectors hard for some students to see. We're installing mounted TVs in those classrooms. In acknowledgement of the role of media, we're also enhancing the sound system in classrooms. After this summer, all students will use managed Apple IDs with federated authentication to support schoolwork. Throughout this year, we'll be transitioning digital citizenship course offerings online, and students will no longer be able to have their restrictions removed until they've successfully demonstrated their understanding of these courses. Lastly, we've issued ourselves, as the IT department, our own challenge. If the culture works with iPads, why are we still being so restrictive in our Mac labs? Do we have to be? We've seen a number of requested open source applications supporting our computer science curriculum act really wonky if the user runs them and doesn't have administrative privileges. Though we've been able to develop workarounds thus far, we've begun examining whether or not we're actually giving the best classroom experience we can in our lab settings as well. So with that, Questions? What's that? Oh, wait, I should do the thing. I'm really bad at throwing things, so if I hit you, I'm sorry. All right.
Regarding the SIS integration, because my school has not done that, and now with the managed Apple IDs coming via the federated authentication, how is that going to affect your workflow? Do you need to do a second upload or a connecting of those two, or?
So the really cool thing about how Apple has set up their federated authentication is that as long as my student information system has the student's email address listed, and that matches the email address listed in Azure Active Directory, then that just matches. So it'll take that user and say, that's this user from the SIS over here, and it will assign that Active Directory user with that managed Apple ID to all of the classes they need. So I still need that SIS integration to pre-populate classes, but it matches off of that email address.
I had a question about your Schoology and kind of versus the Schoolwork. So are you using those both together as your LMS, or are you transitioning from one to the other? I mean, how are you doing that?
So we're not actually going to transition. We're going to use both Schoology and Schoolwork. Schoolwork allows me to say, hey, this is your homework for tonight. And Schoology allows me to actually grade the assignment, make that assignment viewable, and there is a sync between Schoology and my student information system to create that, to write those grades straight to my student information system. So I can't really get rid of Schoology ever, but Schoolwork is just another tool that we're giving teachers so they can kind of monitor. I see it probably being used as for longer projects, like, hey, make sure you check on this and this and this. And that way as a teacher I can go in and see, okay, only a quarter of my students have really started their project. I got to urge them a little more.
Okay, so you're using Schoology in the class for like the day-to-day, and then they're doing assignments within Schoolwork.
They're still currently doing assignments within Schoology, but Schoolwork is another way that I can assign it. So,
Okay.
For example, I can't assign a Quizlet slide deck or a Kahoot quiz within Schoology, so I can assign that within Schoolwork and monitor their progress in there. Again, there's other apps that are available for that as well, but things that I can make available within Schoology are tests that I actually want to score to write back to my my student information system. I can put a link to a Google Drive assignment. So if I update that Google Drive or Google Docs page, it will automatically update for viewing in Schoology, like that kind of thing. There's just certain advantages to both. Ultimately, where this lies, see me in a year, and I'm happy to tell you exactly how our teachers envisioned it. A lot of the vision of using Schoology and Schoolworks together comes from our Director of Academic Technology, who does still teach classes. What we've found is that's usually a good kind of predictor of where things are going to go, but teachers are very creative, and they're going to use whatever is best for them.
I have a question about how environmentally you got your faculty to transition to using Classroom. 'Cause you probably had a 4 or 5 year window of them getting used to one way of managing their iPads in the classes before that came out. So we're toying with the idea of doing that for our one-to-ones next year. But the learning curve part and just getting them to change their now very ingrained method of, how they use the iPads, how the students use the iPads. These are for lower school teachers from K through 3. So I'm just wondering how it was handled, how you broached it, and how you sort of coached the teachers through learning the new, manager.
Sure. So for us, we actually used Casper Focus for a while. We're one of the people who kind of piloted that and adopted it into our school setting. So they sort of had that tool for much longer than we've had Apple Classroom around. But we did still have that challenge when we rolled out Casper Focus. So I'm going to kind of tackle the question from that perspective. Casper Focus didn't allow them to view the screen, but did allow them to focus them into an app. So what we did was we told them, hey, this is a tool that you can use. We educated them on its advantages and disadvantages. And we ultimately let the teachers decide how it played a role in the classroom. To this day, I don't think that all of our teachers use Classroom. Some of them choose not to. And I'm okay with that. I just want them to have that tool for the one student who needs the extra guidance, or the one class that maybe is a little bit less mature and needs less distractions.
Okay.
I think that's one of the technologies that I would never force a teacher to adopt. Unless the goal was to force them to adopt usage of that to take away another program that you were using to manage them. Like if they were just walking around the classroom or something like that. If they were using guided access mode and walking around the classroom, you can kind of preach how much easier it could be and what the benefits are. I would probably fall back to the model I suggested earlier. Find one teacher who actually enjoys integrating it, and then have that teacher tell everybody else what it did for their classroom. It's really hard as IT people to have legitimacy about what happens during that 50, 60 minutes in the classroom, because a lot of times, and in a lot of ways rightfully so, like most of us don't have curriculum training, teachers don't think that we understand what happens there. And I think that we're very good at identifying what could be beneficial in the classroom, but we need to let the teachers kind of use their own creativity and their own thoughts as to how to implement it there. And then once you do, highlight it. Any other questions?
This is kind of a piggyback on that same thing. That teacher that you originally sought out or I guess that's the question, was that a teacher you sought out to explain the process, or was that one that came to you saying, if there are new ways, I want to help? Like, I mean, who initiated that, just trying to figure out where that push and pull comes from.
In this particular case, like that wasn't quite how it happened for us. It was just a suggestion, but we've actually had examples where there were particular technologies that we thought would be good, and we went to some of the people who said, hey, I always want to help you guys. Let me know if there's something new. I'm interested. And there have been cases where a teacher would come to our director of academic technology and say, I'm really struggling and I'm having this problem and I don't know how to fix it. And we'd say, all right, cool. Let me show you this. Any other questions? All right. Thank you guys so much, and thank you for dealing with the demo gods.